Good afternoon, everyone. House Democrats came into this week with three principal objectives with respect to the continuing resolution. First, no spending cuts, mission accomplished. Second, no extreme right-wing policy changes, mission accomplished. Third, no government shutdown, mission accomplished. At this point, it's important for the Congress to come together, Democrats and Republicans, on a bipartisan path forward to fully funding the government. It should be obvious to anyone who is watching that House Republicans are unable to govern on their own. Period. Full stop. No further observation necessary. The events of today should make that clear, as has been the case from the events of this Congress, beginning with January 3rd all the way through to this moment. From the very beginning of this Congress, House Democrats have said that we will work to find bipartisan common ground with our Republican colleagues on any issue, whenever and wherever possible, for the good of the American people. The job of the Congress is to solve problems for hardworking American taxpayers. And that is what House Democrats are prepared to continue to do, as long as we have reasonable partners on the other side of the aisle who are willing to join us in fighting to make life better for everyday Americans, as opposed to literally fighting each other. Questions?
Thank you, Mr. Leader. I know you said this didn't have any extreme cuts or policy riders, but when I was sitting in this chair last week, you said the notion of a laddered CR is another extreme right-wing policy joyride that is reckless and would only crash and burn the federal government. So what changed?
What changed is that we were successful in stopping extreme MAGA Republicans from imposing a laddered continuing resolution. A laddered continuing resolution, as it was envisioned by Andy Biggs, involved up to 12 possible expiration dates. It was a 12-step ladder connected to the 12 appropriations bills, which was nonsensical, extreme, and an effort to try to set up 12 opportunities for Republicans to partially shut down the government. So yes, certainly we rejected the notion of a laddered continuing resolution. What was then presented to us were bifurcated dates involving 4 appropriations bills, all of which are relatively non-controversial, and 3 of which passed the Senate in a bipartisan way that would expire on January 19th, and the remaining 8, including defense and labor H, paired together, as we made clear, would need to happen to get our support that expire on February 2nd. That's not a laddered continuing resolution. It's novel, it's a bifurcation, but it's a bifurcation that is certainly something we could live with, given the fact that substance, every red line that we articulated was not crossed.
Mr. Leader, can you pull back the curtain and illuminate us on your relationship with Speaker Johnson, especially when it comes to what we saw with the CR, where it really seemed like he did put forward something that Democrats could live with?
We have a open, honest, communicative, and candid relationship, similar to the one that I had with the former Speaker, Kevin McCarthy. It's my expectation that that will continue for the good of the American people. Doesn't mean that we will always agree. We certainly will at times strongly disagree with each other, but my approach will continue to be, let's agree to disagree without being disagreeable.
Do you think he's working in good faith?
He's working in good faith to accomplish the objectives important to the House Republican Conference, and we will continue to work in good faith to accomplish the objectives that we believe are important for the American people. Go back to this side. Thanks.
Thanks, Mr. Leader. Obviously, you all, in bipartisan fashion, are to be able to fund the government, no shutdown. However, the big question remains on actually funding the government for the 2024 fiscal year. How confident are you that both the House and the Senate can find agreement on a number of these bills that we have seen, at least right now in the House? Republicans can't even agree on their appropriation bills. Have conversations started between House and Senate leaders, appropriators, to actually try and make that January 19th deadline?
It will be important to immediately begin, in our view, four corners negotiations led by our appropriators, including Rosa DeLauro on our side, who we've got absolute confidence in, to articulate the values that are important to House Democrats and the American people. That should happen, in our view, immediately, in a manner where the spending numbers are consistent with the Bipartisan Fiscal Responsibility Act that everyone agreed to and is now a matter of law. It's time for the extreme MAGA Republicans to end the gamesmanship. They can't even pass their own bills. So why are we wasting time when we have top-line spending numbers established in May through the Bipartisan Fiscal Responsibility Act that the House Republicans themselves negotiated? It should now be clear to the entire world that the only path forward is a bipartisan one, where we proceed with the appropriations discussions amongst House Democrats, House Republicans, Senate Democrats, and Senate Republicans in a manner consistent with the Bipartisan Fiscal Responsibility. That is the path forward. The Senate agrees on that path. The Biden administration agrees on that path. House Democrats agree on that path. There are many House Republicans who agree on that path. And it's time for action. Second row? Yeah, thanks.
Members of the House Freedom Caucus have just put the Speaker on notice, basically saying that they're giving him 10 days to come up with a plan and fiscal responsibility, things like that. Your reaction to this, if they threaten with another motion to vacate?
Well, the House Republican civil war rages on, and yesterday it hit a new low, including apparently acts of physical violence. And it's my hope that they will dial down the temperature and join House Democrats in putting people over politics and delivering for the American people. Now, the House Republican reality show is out of control right now. And it is undermining the ability of the Congress to solve problems on behalf of hardworking American taxpayers. Okay.
We're going to get this ethics report tomorrow on George Santos. He has not been convicted in a court of law. The precedent in the House of Representatives is for a member to have been convicted or a member of the Confederacy. I don't think he's a member of the Confederacy. Him, you don't know. That said, do you think it's appropriate to vote to expel someone like George Santos now that he has had due process, but not due process in a court of law?
Well, any expulsion resolution should be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. Seems to me that George Santos is unfit to serve as a member of Congress based on the clear lies that he had told to the people of the 3rd Congressional District in New York. He is a serial fraudster. But in terms of any expulsion resolution that is before the Congress, potentially at the end of this month or the beginning of next month, I'll reserve judgment until I've had an opportunity to review the ethics report. Kevin?
But to that point, would you like to, given what you already know of this case and how you voted on these expulsion resolutions previously, would you want to see it reintroduced?
Well, let's wait until the ethics report is released and members have had an opportunity to review it, because now that there will be an actual investigation with actual findings that presumably will have been arrived at in a bipartisan way, the Ethics Committee being evenly divided amongst Democrats and Republicans. I think it requires a serious analysis of that ethics report, and then hopefully a bipartisan conclusion as to the appropriate way to deal with George Santos.
Is that the case you would make to the 20-some-odd Democrats that voted to table it the last time?
After evaluating the ethics report, it's the case that I think I would make to the entire Congress and to the American people if the ethics report clearly justifies expulsion.
Some Republicans have expressed their desire to potentially bring another Israel aid bill to the floor that does not include the pay for it by slashing the IRS budget, instead coming up with a different way to pay for it. Would you be open to considering that, considering the fact that some Democrats have already voted for the initial package?
It's important to provide support for Israel in Israel's time of great and urgent need, but also, of course, to provide support for the Ukrainian people, provide support for the humanitarian assistance requested by the Biden administration in connection with Palestinian civilians who are in harm's way, and provide support for our allies in the Indo-Pacific. And so my view is that what is in front of us at this moment relates to a bipartisan negotiation that is taking place in the Senate, connected to President Biden's requests for funding to meet the national security needs of the American people. The House Republicans have lost the legitimacy with respect to governing on this issue. They can't even pass their own appropriations bills. And so I do think that House Democrats and House Republicans can engage in the negotiations at a four corners level with our Senate colleagues. But the notion that House Republicans should lead on this issue or any issue, the train has left the station.
Hey, a quick question, kind of backing up a little to last week. Democrats obviously performed really well in those elections that were held. What's your kind of takeaway from that? Does that make you confident for where Democrats are positioned for 2024? Especially considering that, up ballot, Biden isn't polling super well. But so what do you make of the Democrat victories last Tuesday?
Needless to say, our confidence is pretty high right now. And I think that is because we've got an incredible track record of accomplishment in terms of what has happened when Democrats had the opportunity to govern, from the American Rescue Plan to infrastructure investment and jobs being brought to the American people, clean water in every community, high-speed internet access, bringing domestic manufacturing jobs back home to America through the CHIPS and Science Act, and of course, striking a dramatic blow against the climate crisis in historic fashion through the Inflation Reduction Act, and dropping the price of insulin to $35 a month for millions of Americans. We have an incredible track record of success. We have a vision for the future. We're going to continue to put people over politics and fight for the things that matter, like lower costs, growing the middle class, safer communities, reproductive freedom, defending our democracy, strengthening Social Security and Medicare, and building an economy that works for hardworking, everyday Americans. And we have a clear contrast with the chaos, the dysfunction, and the extremism on the other side of the aisle, coming from House Republicans, which repeatedly have demonstrated the inability to govern in responsible fashion.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. You mentioned that the Senate is taking the lead on the national security supplemental request from the White House. There's also a domestic supplemental request that the administration put forward. Is that something that you would like to see the Senate take the lead on as well, or is that something that you feel like the House Democrats and House Republicans can figure out a path forward?
Yeah, it's my hope that in the context of the negotiations that are ongoing in the Senate right now with respect to the national security issues that are before them, that they will also consider the domestic supplemental funding requests that came from the Biden administration including on childcare, on affordable internet access, and as it relates to the Women, Infants, and Children program. In my view, those critically important domestic policy priorities should be part of the ongoing discussions and hopefully will be part of any legislation that emerges from the Senate and is sent over to the House of Representatives.
What's the path forward if the Senate decides to just focus solely on the national security package?
Well, there are many Democratic senators who believe in the urgency of addressing the domestic policy priorities that have been articulated by President Biden and the administration. So I'm still very hopeful that we'll see both taken care of in the legislation that's ultimately negotiated. Thanks. Go back over to this side and then come.
Mr. Leader, thank you. House Republicans say they are closing in on making a decision on whether to impeach President Biden or not. I guess just generally your reaction to them possibly coming to that the next month or so.
House Republican extremists cannot get out of their own way. I mean, Republicans were routed electorally last week because they continued to peddle extreme things like criminalizing abortion care or imposing a nationwide abortion ban. The American people know that Republicans have put a target on the back of Social Security and Medicare. Many don't believe in democracy as we know it. House Republicans have no interest in solving problems for the American people in terms of reducing costs and addressing affordability issues. And if they were to go down the road of an illegitimate impeachment of President Biden, all that will do is reinforce the notion that House Republicans are too extreme and unfit to govern.
Can you describe the path forward on FISA reform and how you see that getting resolved before the end of the year?
Well, there are ongoing discussions with respect to FISA reform and legislative activity that has taken place. And I'm very hopeful and optimistic that we will see FISA reauthorized by the end of the year with some reform that is agreed upon in a bipartisan way. Democrats and Republicans on the House Judiciary Committee are working on some FISA reforms, and Democrats and Republicans on the House Intel Committee, led by Jim Himes, are working on FISA reauthorization as well. And that's why I'm pretty confident that we're going to be able to find the common ground necessary. It's not a highly partisan issue. There are Democrats on the House Judiciary Committee who agree with Republicans on the House Judiciary Committee who may have a different position in terms of the House Judiciary Committee members than Democrats on the House Intel Committee who agree with their Republican colleagues on the House Intel Committee who may differ from Judiciary Committee members. When you see that kind of lineup, it usually means that there's a clear path forward for Congress to find common ground. Thanks.
Mr. Leader, how would you characterize morale in your caucus after all the drama and the stalemates and the conflicts of the last 10 weeks?
Morale is very high. Earlier today, I usually have an opportunity to give a report to the Congressional Black Caucus, and my report this week was very short. No spending cuts, no right-wing extreme policy changes, no government shutdown, no votes tomorrow. Happy Thanksgiving. That is the type of report that when you are able to give it means morale is very high.
Thank you.
Thanks.
About 24 members of the Democratic caucus here in the House, a lot of progressive members just wrote to President Biden urging him to call for a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war and to give more clarity around his efforts to de-escalate the conflict there. What's your response to that? Do you share their opinion?
So my opinion is very clear, which is that there are three things that need to happen in the context of the Israel-Hamas war. First, Israel must decisively defeat Hamas. and make sure that this brutal terrorist regime never rises again. Decisively defeating Hamas is the right thing to do for Israel, but it's also the right thing to do for the democratic aspirations of the Palestinian people in Gaza. Second, we have to do everything possible to bring the hostages home safely. Third, it's important to support the Biden administration's efforts to surge humanitarian assistance to Palestinian civilians in Gaza who are in harm's way in the midst of the fog of war through no fault of their own. That's the approach that the Biden administration has taken, and that's the approach that I strongly support.
Congresswoman Summer Lee has a statement out saying that she condemned the fact that leaders in both parties were sharing the stage yesterday with an anti-Semitic pastor at the March for Israel. Do you have any response to that?
I was on the stage with Leader Chuck Schumer, Speaker Mike Johnson, and Senator Joni Ernst. I have no idea what she's talking about. All right. Last questions?
Just wanted to clarify on Ukraine, Israel aid. It sounds like you are looking to the Senate to pass something and send it over. Have you spoken with Speaker Johnson about the possibility of originating something in the House? He had floated the idea of at least the marrying Ukraine with border security, and it sounded like he was eyeing something that would begin over here in the lower chamber. And the second part of that question is there an appetite to pass both of those before the end of the year, or is that something that might get kicked to the CR deadline?
Well, there is nothing that will happen in the House of Representatives in a partisan fashion that has any shot of becoming law. To the extent that House Republicans are interested in addressing issues relative to America's national security and strengthening the situation at the border, my suggestion would be show a willingness to support President Biden's funding requests to enhance the situation at the border, hire more judges to process the asylum applications, and do other things that are designed to change the situation on the ground. House Republicans have instead continued to simply show a willingness to try to make a political issue out of the border and accompany that with an unwillingness to find common ground to actually solve the challenges they say exist and need to be addressed. Last question.
Will they get done by the end of the year, or will that get kicked into next year?
There's no circumstance where we should leave Congress this year without making sure that we have provided funding for Ukraine, funding for Israel, funding for humanitarian assistance for Palestinian civilians who are in harm's way, and otherwise meeting the national security needs of the American people.
I was just going to ask about Speaker Johnson. You had this relationship somewhat with former Speaker McCarthy. Have you been able to strike up much of a relationship with him, and how's that going?
Yeah, we've had a very positive, communicative, open, honest, and candid relationship over the last few weeks, and I expect that that will continue.
And do you have any advice for him as he faces these difficulties leading divided Republicans?
Good luck. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. All right, thanks.